August 20th, 1942, somewhere in the waters north of Guadalcanal, Vice Admiral Raizo Tanaka is standing on the bridge of the light cruiser Jinsu, commander of Destroyer Squadron 2 of the Imperial Japanese Navy, a veteran of Coral Sea and Midway. And at 14:20 hours, a radio report reaches him that he would still be writing about more than a decade later. 20 enemy carrier planes have just landed on the airfield at Guadalcanal. Tanaka does the arithmetic immediately. The Marines took that airfield on August 7th, 13 days ago. In his own post-war account, published in English for the first time in 1956, Tanaka doesn't describe shock. He just records what the report meant. The enemy had captured and completed the airfield in less than 2 weeks, and it was now operational, which would make his own mission harder. That flat, professional sentence carries the whole story, because Tanaka's Navy had been building that exact airfield since May. Japanese construction troops had spent 3 months on that stretch of jungle. In less than 2 weeks, an American force that had inherited their unfinished project turned it into a working military airbase. This is the story of how that happened, and of the construction force behind it. One that would go on to complete work on more than 300 islands across the Pacific over the next 3 years, using the same basic method that caught Tanaka's attention that August afternoon. Start with May 1942, when Japanese naval survey teams walked the flat coastal plain at Lunga Point on Guadalcanal and picked it for a new airfield. A base here would let Japanese land-based bombers reach the sea lanes between the United States and Australia. 2 construction units landed in early July, one of 1,379 men and one of 1,145. By mid-July, they were joined by 250 civilian laborers of the Hama Construction Unit and specialists from the 14th Encampment Corps installing radio and radar equipment. A small number of local islanders were pressed into the work too, all of it manual: picks, shovels, hand carts on narrow rail track, a runway graded by hand with whatever machinery the units had brought. It was slow, and by the standards of the time, it was going well. American coast watchers spotted the construction and reported it up the chain. On the night of August 6th, the night before the Marines landed, the Japanese construction troops got an extra ration of sake to celebrate finishing the runway ahead of schedule. They had no idea an American invasion fleet was already at sea. On August 7th, 1942, 11,000 United States Marines came ashore on Guadalcanal and Tulagi in Operation Watchtower, the first American ground offensive of the war. The Japanese garrison at Lunga Point, mostly construction troops, fled into the jungle without much of a fight. By nightfall, on the 8th, the Marines held roughly 2,600 feet of finished runway, still short of usable length, still ungraded at the far end. Abandoned Japanese trucks and rollers scattered around it. Here's the part worth getting right, because the popular version of this story flattens it. The Americans didn't build a new airfield from nothing. They captured an almost finished one and had to complete it under worse conditions than anyone had planned for. The 1st Marine Division's own engineer battalion moved up to Lunga Point on August 9th to finish the job, and their equipment, the bulldozers and dump trucks brought across the Pacific for exactly this task, was still sitting in transport ships offshore. 2 days earlier, the First Battle of Savo Island had forced those transports to withdraw before most of their cargo came off. So the Marine engineers used what was left behind. Captured Japanese rollers, captured dump cars still running on the Japanese narrow-gauge track. And, when machinery ran out, hand shovels, they extended the runway by 1,178 feet. The official Army history records that closing a 196-foot gap in the middle of the strip took moving 100,000 cubic feet of earth, largely by hand. No steel matting yet. After every hard rain, the field turned to mud. A PBY. Catalina made the first landing on August 12th, Major General Alexander Vandegrift declared the field ready for fighters and dive bombers that same day, a call he later described as courageous, given the daily air raids the position was already under. On August 20th, 19 Wildcat fighters and 12 Dauntless dive bombers, launched from the escort carrier USS Long Island, touched down on a strip Vandegrift would later call one of the most beautiful sights of his life. That was the news reaching Tanaka's radio room at 14:20 hours. An inherited, half-finished Japanese project, repaired and extended under combat conditions, now running a permanent American air wing 13 days after the Marines first landed. The men improvising with shovels and captured equipment were about to be relieved by a force built to do this kind of work permanently. 7 months earlier, on December 28, 1941, Rear Admiral Ben Morrell, chief of the Navy's Bureau of Yards and Docks, had asked for authority to organize militarized naval construction battalions. Part of the problem he was solving was legal. Civilian contractors building advance bases had no protected status under the Geneva Convention if captured in a combat zone. The Bureau of Navigation approved his request on January 5, 1942, and the units were officially named on March 5, 5 months before Guadalcanal. Morrell recruited straight from the building trades: carpenters, electricians, steam shovel operators, welders, men who had learned their skills on real job sites. Because physical standards were relaxed for tradesmen with the right experience, the average age of these first CBs was 37, and a number of men in their 60s got in anyway. They called themselves CBs, from the letters CB for Construction Battalion, and by the time the war ended, more than 258,000 men, representing over 60 skilled trades, had worn the uniform. The first CB unit to see combat was the 6th Naval Construction Battalion, landing at Guadalcanal on September 1, 1942, under Lieutenant Commander Paul Blunden. Their job was to keep repairing and expanding what the Marine engineers had started, faster than Japanese bombing and naval bombardment could tear it apart. Blunden later put a number on the standard his men held to. 100 CBs could repair the damage of a 500-pound bomb hit on an airstrip in 40 minutes. On the night of October 13th and 14th, 1942, the Japanese battleships Kongo and Haruna delivered an 80-minute bombardment of Henderson Field with specially designed fragmentation shells, destroying or seriously damaging 48 of the roughly 90 American aircraft on the field. The runway took 53 craters over the following 2 days. On October 14th alone, ground crews counted 13 fresh craters in a single hour, filled before circling American fighters ran too low on fuel to stay up. One of the men doing that work deserves his name, said plainly. Seaman 2nd Class Lawrence C. Meyer of the 6th Battalion, known as Bucky, spent his off-duty hours repairing an abandoned machine gun he found near the airfield. On October 3, 1942, he used it to shoot down a Japanese Zero, making a strafing run, earning the Silver Star and becoming the first decorated CB of the war. 13 days later, on October 16th, he was killed when Japanese naval gunfire struck the gasoline barge he was working on. He never got the medal in person. He was one of more than 300 CBs who died in combat across the Pacific, alongside more than 500 who died on the job site itself. The method used at Guadalcanal became the pattern elsewhere. At Espiritu Santo, in the New Hebrides, a CB detachment built a 6,000-foot airstrip from raw jungle in 20 days, working through the night under floodlights. At Bougainville, in November 1943, the 71st Naval Construction Battalion began a fighter strip near Cape Torokina on November 10th, while fighting was still going on nearby, and had it operational by December 10th. By Iwo Jima, in 1945, CBs were preparing captured airfields for damaged B-29s before the ground battle for the island had even ended, and Admiral Halsey told reporters that if it came to it, the CBs would build another island and put 4 or 5 airfields on it. By the end of the war, Across more than 300 islands, Seabees had completed more than 111 major airstrips, more than 441 piers, more than 2,558 ammunition magazines, fuel storage exceeding 100 million gallons, and housing for more than 1.5 million servicemen. Here's where this shifts from record to reading. What Tanaka's report caught wasn't a secret weapon. It was the visible result of two different construction doctrines running into each other. Japan's method depended on a limited pool of specialist units and manual labor, built for a war of expansion into undefended territory, where nobody expected to be shot at while finishing the runway. The American method assumed the opposite from the start, and treated construction speed as close to a tactical asset in its own right, one that let a captured, half-finished enemy project become an operational forward base before the other side could adjust. That's a reasonable conclusion to draw from the pattern of the Pacific Campaign, not a line lifted from a wartime planning document, and it's worth flagging as reading rather than record. What's documented and still remarkable on its own. Japan spent roughly 3 months on the initial construction at Lunga Point, and an American force of exhausted Marine engineers, followed by Navy construction battalions, repaired, extended, and then massively expanded that same project under fire, largely with equipment the enemy had left behind. Raizo Tanaka served through the rest of the war, was never charged with war crimes, and lived until 1969. Having given his own account of the Guadalcanal campaign to an American naval journal in 1956, the account this story draws from. Ben Morrill retired in 1946 as the first officer of the Navy's Staff Corps ever to reach 4-star rank. The Seabees he organized are still active today, more than 80 years later, under the same 2 words, can do. If someone in your family wore that construction battalion uniform, on Guadalcanal or Espiritu Santo or Bougainville or anywhere else across the Pacific, their unit and their story belong in the comments. Subscribe if you want the next one.